The Sinclair ZX Spectrum was first released in 1982. This was mine. In many ways it was technically simpler than its competitors, rubber keyboard, one-channel sound, 8 colours. But it soon attracted a huge dedicated fan base, largely because of its tens of thousands of games.
Dundalk,
Trashman,
Death Chase 3D,
Arcadia, Valhalla, like Outrun,
Games like Elite,
R-Type,
Matchday 2,
Chase HQ,
Head Over Heels, Valhalla, Attic Attack,
3 Weeks in Paradise, Herbert's Dummy Run,
Deus Ex Machina,
Jet Set Willy,
Lords of Midnight,
Robin of the Wood, the Dundalk TNNR,
Paperboy,
Underworld, Frankie Goes to Hollywood,
International Match Day for
TNNR.
Everyone's a Wally, Pyjamarama, Spellbound, Jack the Nipper, Trapdoor,
Bugaboo the Fleet,
Dizzy, any Dizzy game,
Checkered Flag,
There's Checkered Flag,
Batman,
Jetpack, Gauntlet, Starquake, Dynamite Dan,
Attic Attack, Head Over Heels and Alien Highway as well.
Dan Dare 2,
Chase HQ,
Cookie,
Bullseye, Operation Wolf,
Renegade,
Finders Keepers, Spellbound, Nighttime,
Turbo Esprit,
Stormbringer.
is it Lunar Jetman, Jetman on the Moon?
Avalon,
Nightlaw.
The ZX Spectrum ceased production in 1992, and the last full-price commercial game was released in 1993. But by that point, a whole generation of young people had grown up with a computer, immersing themselves in its imaginary worlds. I was one of them. I wanted to find out more about their experiences, and my own. It all started in December 1982, Christmas 1982, when my parents very generously decided to get me a computer. They were going to buy me a ZX81, but fortunately, during that year, they learned that Sir Clive Sinclair had brought out an updated version, the ZX Spectrum, which had the advantage of a better keyboard, a rubber keyboard, but a better keyboard than a flat, touch-sensitive one. Sound chip, one-channel sound chip, and 8 colours, hence the name, the ZX Spectrum. And they tested it out the night before Christmas, so they had the experience for the first time before I had it of watching pictures unscroll line by line on the family television screen in the living room. And you didn't know what it was until again, the colours come down the screen. And my dad said, it's saying hello. It's saying hello to us.
I first got a Spectrum in about 1983, well, Christmas 1982. I got my 16K ZX Spectrum, and then this one came along about 6 months after that for my birthday, and the 16K broke, so we took it back and got 48K instead.
I'm Bob Fisher. I got my first Spectrum for Christmas in 1984, Christmas Day 1984.
So I think I had a 48K and the one with the rubber keys, and then also the one with the plastic keys. But I'm not sure of the spec exactly.
It was an issue 2 Spectrum from I think 1992 with the rubber keys.
I'm really proud of this. I thought it would be battered around a little bit, but it's beautiful. Rubber keys still working, I think. I did have it in action a couple of years ago. I was curious to see if it still worked, and it did.
48K rubber key, and it was the Christmas of 84, I think.
Oh, it must have been Christmas 84, and it was the rubber keyboard model. It came with the 6-pack with Horoscope Skiing and Checkered Flag and games like that. Amazing to get.
My name is Chris O'Regan, and the first Spectrum I had was the ZX Spectrum Plus, which was in 1983. It looks kind of like this.
I first got my first Spectrum in 1989. We were on a caravan holiday in Inverness, believe it or not, and the first one I purchased was Vista Plus 2 with the light gun accessory, which that was from the Victorian market in Inverness.
My name's Matt Birch, and the very first Spectrum I had was in 1983, and it was an issue 2. 48K Spectrum rubber key.
The first Spectrum that was my own was the Spectrum Plus 2. I always remember getting that over Easter. It was a total surprise, and it was just so wonderful to finally have my very own computer. It was lovely. The Spectrum Plus 2 was a special machine to me because of that.
And my first experience of the Spectrum was at a coding club. It was supposed to be a coding club, but we all just used to bring in like copied games and play them instead.
And the fact that I've still got my equipment now, even from the tangible feeling of what the keys felt like, the sounds that they made, the tape loading screens, as annoying as they were, when you listen to them now, you can remember what they sounded like back in the day. So actually the time between doesn't really make a difference. For me, going through my collection and actually finding small notes that I've made and thinking back to that was me, and am I writing something that's being written for me in the future? So it's a time travel device going back to not just the nostalgia, but I can pick up where I left off and actually feel that my actual age isn't a factor here. I'm actually experiencing the same thing over and again.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest comments we get on TripAdvisor and on our feedback forms. It's a real trip down memory lane. And, you know, they're playing things that they never thought they'd play again. So to come here and they can see all the machines and all the games that they used to play, but not only that, they can then try all the machines and games that they could not afford back in the day, or the machines they didn't have.
But it's not about revisiting the game, it's about just takes you back to where you were, and you can imagine the screen in the corner. We had the open window here, curtains open.
Perched on the edge of the bench.
Yeah, it was just like long summer days, just the whole scene really. It wasn't just that screen, it was just the environment and the whole thing.
Back in the 80s, there was the closure of the mines, the heavy industries like steel, and you know, it wasn't a happy time. There was mass unemployment all over the place. So, okay, us as kids were looking for job prospects, but you did tap into that mood of the time. So we were looking for escape, just like our parents did. They were maybe where parents can maybe go to the pub or, you know, do adult things. Us as kids were trapped in the house. So the Spectrum is this conduit to escapism for us. And the Spectrum brought you to imaginary worlds. Your imagination was fired up to, you were an astronaut, you were an adventurer, you were an explorer. You were able to disassociate from yourself and become whatever character you were in the game.
For me, it's just the gateway into a big love of mine, which is gaming. It was the original thing for me that really got me into it. I mean, I'll be completely honest, I play some games on emulators now, and they're nowhere near as good as I remember them, but they still always hold a little special place, because that's what I spent a lot of my youth playing. I still get, you know, on my Mac, I emulate games every now and again, only for like 20 minutes or so at a time, but it just keeps it fresh in my mind and reminds me of where it all came from. And I just think gaming now owes so much to what went on then.
The Spectrum was the first computer that everyone could get access to, because it was the first working class computer. So prior to that, there were computer systems that were slightly more powerful, but they were, you know, £300, £400. The Commodore 64 didn't come until a year later. I think that was £299 when it launched, maybe even more. So for the Spectrum to come out at £175, I think it dropped to 130 within a year. And even then, if you could pick them up second hand for even cheaper, meant that it was the first computer that was powerful enough to get some decent use out of functionally. It was it was a great little system that everyone could get access to. It's the first time, I think, where certain people growing up could actually get some real close friends. If it wasn't football or some sort of sports activity, what was it going to be? And maybe toys like Transformers, but for me, the computing and video games were where I found all of my friends growing up.
Were the guys who did Tin and Nog, were they Irish? Was that their background?
That wasn't garbled.
My interviews brought together people who'd never met, people who hadn't talked about the ZX Spectrum for 30 years. But soon they were chatting like old friends, bonding over their shared experiences. I wanted to find out more about the role the Spectrum played in people's friendships when they were growing up.
My dad would go to work and come back with games he got from his mates. In fact, I don't think I ever had a legal Jet Set Willy.
A double
double-edged sword, to be honest. It was very good in making friends, without a doubt. I made friends. Simon Westwood, Wes, who's still one of my best mates. We bonded through playing ZX Spectrum games. I have to say, it quite possibly lost me a couple of friends as well, because I was so addicted to it, so lost in this world of ZX Spectrum gaming. I probably drifted away from them a little bit. It was me. I know that I've got an obsessive personality, and that when I find a hobby or a pastime like that, I will throw myself into it. Right, that is a map of, as a kid, one of the first games I ever wrote was a little adventure game called Yarm Town of Terror, and Yarm is my hometown. I think that's good. That's Herne the Hunter from Robin of Shore. I do feel a little bit sad sometimes that I couldn't share that with some of my friends, or that they couldn't share it with me. But I think that's maybe just childhood in general. As you grow older, you find different hobbies and different pastimes to your friends, and you do drift apart sometimes.
My friendships were an interesting group as far as I was the only Spectrum fan. My friends all had Commodores, so we couldn't swap and exchange games, but we could talk about similar titles that had been released. And there was obviously a lot of ribbing at the quality of the Spectrum, but actually when I was able to get to levels further than them, it was then a bit of competition, not about the machinery, but about each other. And that was really bonding when, at a time, I could have felt quite isolated. And it bonded me to people who I may not have had anything in common with. And finding a particular title that me and a friend really got immersed in, that we really enjoyed, was a lovely opportunity to then talk about things outside of school, but really focus into a small world that we were both sharing.
Among friends, you would swap games. Obviously people would copy games, although that could be more frustrating than not having the game. I think I had a tape copy of Everyone's a Wally, which I think I played maybe once out of about 40 attempts to try and load. But yes, swapping games, going around to friends' houses and playing games, that was a really big part of my friendship.
Just about a month ago, I met with some friends who are the same circle of friends that I had back then. One of them now lives in Canada, but he came over to see his dad. And so we just sat there in a board game shop talking about stuff, and we were sort of reminiscing. And one of my friends actually gave me a ZX Spectrum mug with Jet Set Willy, so when you pour tea in it, it reveals Jet Set Willy. So yeah, they're still with me, and they still remember these games, and they're still, with great affection, sort of realise that we really bonded over them. But there's definitely a bond with us that's held with us for all these years. All of these years, we're still very much. So we did actually share something, and it's obviously lasted that long. So we have a lot to thank for the Spectrum and Clive for his work there. Could be anything, even if one of us had a 66-4.
For some bizarre reason, in my year group, I was only one of very few people with older siblings. So no one really had the Spectrum or anything like that. So they wouldn't have a clue what I was talking about when I go in. But as I got a bit older, particularly in the 128K plus 2 era, there were a few more people with it. So yeah, it was the classic game swap, go around each other's houses at the weekends, try out games, things like that, swap episodes of editions of Crash, all that kind of thing.
Oh yeah, the Spectrum was everything for that. I mean, we taped. There were some people who you knew would be good for borrowing games off. I think some people had a bit more money than the rest of us, so they would buy more games, and then they'd use that as a friendship counter. Especially when the big box games came out, that cost a tenner. I mean, nobody wanted to be friends with the people who were buying the Mastertronic £1.99 games.
And yeah, sort of having a school bag full of those big box games, the 10 quid ones, and I can't fit any more in, we're trying to sort of, swap and change them. Everyone doing moody copies of them as well, all that kind of stuff.
You could buy the Ultimate games, and that really worked out. Yeah, I remember my friends. I always remember, my friend Stevie Carter had. He bought Attic Attack, and that was a really big, exciting deal. And Lunar Jetman, he had. And I linked to the people. My friend Millage, he and I used to play Slave together. And Lords of Mid. My friend Robin had Jet Set Willy, and he completed the day after the first Pokes came out. That meant you could finish Jet Set Willy. He set up till gone 10 o'clock. And finish that game. So yeah, it was part of our world. It was like, I think pop music is it for some kids, and for my little group of losers, it was a ZX Spectrum.
I remember people coming round, and I would always have to take turns playing the games because the 2-player modes just never seemed to work correctly. Whenever you plug 2 joysticks in, It was always a problem. It never quite got going. So I do remember taking it in turns playing games, long periods of time, and when everyone, sort of started to make the jump to other consoles and other things, everyone would just, not wanting to be coming to my place to play the Spectrum anymore because it was uncool.
So the Spectrum for me was a big, it was a huge part of my life personally, but socially as well. I think when we were at school, there were sort of three layers of people who you connect with over games on the Spectrum in particular. There was this like small kind of hardcore group of people who were really into the Spectrum. It was just it was everything to talk about. We'd be trading games, be swapping tips. You'd be talking about what you played and what you were going to play. There was the next layer out, which was people who had other interests but were still really into games as well. And you could talk to them. You could swap games occasionally, but they weren't such a great source of knowledge. And then there was this third layer of people who played games but never talked about them. And you would occasionally bump into them, and they'd suddenly reveal that they were playing these games, and you think, I never knew that you played computers, and because I was so invested in the Spectrum, they seemed almost like strangers to me. It was very centred around, I think, boys as well. I mean, you certainly felt that it was more of a boy thing. But actually, looking back on it now, there were an awful lot of girls as well who were playing it. They just weren't talking about it in the same way that we were.
I don't think it was something that I did outside of the home at all. I don't remember any of my friends at school being particular. I went to an all-girls school, although when I was playing these games, I think it would have been primary school, so that would have been mixed. But I don't remember playing with any of my friends. No, it was very much something that I did on my own or with my brother. I remember my brother having friends around to play games. And he's 3 years older than me, so I remember him playing it with his friendship group, but it was never a part of my friendship group.
I'll quickly just say that, all the boys I knew were into it and stuff, and it was all boys with boys, and I never remember talking to any girl ever about it.
I don't think I ever talked to any. I went to an all-girls school, but I didn't talk to anyone about it. It was just something we did at home. Really, I don't even know if any of my friends had a computer of any kind,
So you
unless they had maybe a brother.
Yeah, for the most part, it seemed that it was us nerdy boys that liked the video games, and I don't seem to recall ever discussing video games with girls at school, which is a shame because I would have quite liked the attention.
I think I was very lucky in that my parents never treated me any differently or expected me to do anything that my brother didn't, or vice versa. Just because I was a girl and he was a boy, so it was just, there's a computer, you can both play on it. There's a magazine, you can both type in programs from it. So it didn't even occur to me that I shouldn't play with it or be involved with it just because I was a girl.
I don't think I ever went outside of our family, which is really odd because like a lot of the kids I was at school with, to my knowledge, didn't play games, so it was sort of a family thing that me and my sisters did, really. Yeah.
I knew all the girls at school. If they were interested in video games, I would have found out. So I'm pretty sure they weren't some sort of secret Spectrum gamers and they were afraid to talk to us,
Yeah, I think that had something to do with who the advertising of the actual computers was aimed at in the early days. I don't think the British companies ever aimed them at girls. I don't think there was an attempt really to get girls coding at school that I can remember. There's a game called Psycho Pigs UXB which was on the Spectrum and Commodore, and the advert is 2 young lads stood in front of a billboard. There is a topless woman holding a copy of this game in front of her, and then one young lad says, I know which one I'd rather play with. And then the other lad saying, yeah, but have you seen the reviews for Psycho Pigs UXB? Who thought of that? But that's unfortunate, it's where the market was aimed at. So, I'm not saying it led to exactly real awkwardness between the sexes at school, but I think it made it harder. Because we'd be like in our groups talking about the latest games, and the girls would have their smash hits and sat in totally separate groups, and then when it comes time for the two to meet, it's sort of like, oh my God, now what do I do? And I think it did make it far more awkward.
I don't think I ever felt it was a boys' culture. I never felt that way. Perhaps naively, I don't know. it never occurred to us as girls or as sisters that it was a boy thing to do, because I was into, I wanted to be a barbarian, I wanted to race cars, I wanted to be a robot, that kind of thing. So whether that's odd or not, it just didn't occur to me that it was a male thing to do. That never entered my head, which is great, because I mean, in our family that must have been quite a positive environment to have grown up in, that you don't have to be a certain way to be a girl, if that makes sense. Yeah.
So one of the games that I liked playing was Gauntlet. Started playing that in the arcades with my brother and my male cousin, and then when the ZX Spectrum game came out, that was one of the ones I used to like. And I remember always wanting to play the female character in that. Very few female characters in the games generally. So when there was one, I guess it was like, hey, I want to be the Valkyrie or whatever it was, if I remember correctly.
For Adrian, the line between friendship and gaming blurred even further one glorious English summer, while the boundary between teenage boys and girls remained as rigid as ever.
We used to play Ikari Warriors on the Spectrum, it's been 86 or 87, something like that, and in one of the biggest life imitates art that I've come across in my own personal life, we were getting told by our parents, go out, stop sitting around that computer all day. So we were aimlessly wandering up the end of the road, and it basically petered out, the houses gave way to like this little country lane, and about halfway along this country lane there's like these two big concrete blocks, and I can't remember which one of us, there was three of us, can't remember which one of us said, that's like a bit like the bunkers out of Ikari Warriors. Before we realised what we were doing, right, they're the bunkers, two of us here, we're going to storm the bunkers, and it developed over the next couple of days, so we thought, well, we need hand grenades, so let's take a cricket ball. And then of course we've started with actual toy guns that we had to go to get from the attic that we would have had as much younger kids, and suddenly there we were as 12, 13 year olds with like pop guns. But what was really great about it was we played it a couple of weeks over the summer holidays, and then I can't remember which lad it was, but his girlfriend turned up, and with three other girls, and of course it was, what on earth are you doing? And instantly it was like, throw the guns into the bushes, no, we're not doing anything. And so it died as quickly as it started, but it was fun whilst it lasted.
The Spectrum was a magical machine for lots of different reasons. I think it captured a moment in my childhood that was very important. I remember The Hobbit particularly standing out as a game where my mum had read me the books, and I'd imagined it while my mum had, with my mum's voice, and then when I played the game, I wrapped myself in a blanket and read what was on the screen and projected my own images from when my mum had read it to me over the top of the really primitive graphics that appeared on the screen. And that I remember putting the blanket on me, and I reckon that was probably a subconscious sort of lying in bed listening to my mum while I played the game.
The part that it played within my family was something that became a bit of an escape for me. My parents were very supportive financially. They paid for my first Spectrum. They would drive me to the shop where we would buy the cassettes and use my pocket money for that. But they weren't really interested in what I was doing. Didn't really have any connections over the titles. They just saw it as, oh, it's a thing that Jim wants to do. And I remember when they did buy me my first TV, that meant that I could play the Spectrum in my room rather than waiting for family time to be over so that I could then take control of the TV. And that was really quite rewarding. It gave me that opportunity to escape in my bedroom to all these different wonderful lands and characters.
I mean, honestly, my parents bought me the ZX Spectrum for Christmas, 1984. My memories of Christmas Day that year are absolutely of me and my mum playing checkered flag. I remember the whole family having a crack at Attic Attack on Christmas night, when I dare say a bit too much brandy had been drunk by everybody. It probably drifted off a little bit after that. I think the Spectrum, it was a generational thing. I mean, my dad and my mum took a passing interest in it when I first got it. I think as I grew older and became more and more intrigued by the Spectrum and its possibilities, it lost them.
I have 3 siblings, 2 brothers and a sister. The oldest brother is 9 years older than me, and he didn't have much interest in it at all, apart from Football Manager. He loved Football Manager. We both loved Football Manager, because we used to play it on the 81, because I had a ZX81 before I got the Spectrum. That's why I got a Plus, because I had to beg, borrow and steal, going, really, this is a terrible computer, like to my parents, who were and are Luddites. No offence to them, but they were not at all technically savvy. You know, they could barely manage to work the washing machine.
So my brother's 8 years older than me, and he was my gateway into being a gamer with the 48K. So there was always frequent shouts, or whenever he would go out to play, I'd say, "Oh, can't play the computer while you're out, blah, blah, blah." And he'd either say yes or no. Because I was such a goody two-shoes, if he said no, I'd just go and sulk rather than try and play it behind his back. But yeah, so it was like two-way really. So I'd either be fascinated watching him play games so I could try and understand what was happening, what to do. So when he goes out, I can emulate it myself. Or we would enjoy some of the two-player games like Gauntlet or Double Dragon. Rampage was a favourite of ours as well. I mean, my parents didn't really get involved in it. I think my mum, she used to quite like a tick-attack every now and again, but that was the extent of it. My dad wasn't interested in the slightest. So yeah, it was quite a good bonding point for me and my brother, that's for sure.
Me and my brother shared this Spectrum. Well, but I should say, me and my brother and my sister shared this Spectrum, but my sister never got to play it at all, I think. And then me and my brother, we had a strict rule-based system of whose turn it was to use it when. I mean, we shared a bedroom, and we did have masking tape down the middle of the bedroom to denote whose side was where. And the key thing was the computer desk was bang in the middle of that thing. So yeah, so me and him used to play it a lot. We'd talk about it, we'd play it. When I had my national champion of Sabrewulf, which I got to get into somewhere, my brother James held the map of Sabrewulf for me and guided me through it, and we'd sort of help each other in that way. My parents didn't really understand much about it at all. I mean, they thought it was going to be educational, which it was, but not necessarily in the way they thought it was.
Yeah, I think my parents bought it for me as a kind of educational tool, as I think most people had it in that early batch of 1982 Christmas presents. But then, if I remember, even by Christmas dinner time, we had the Through the Wall game loaded so it was an interesting thing on the sampler tape. Yeah, my dad was keen to kind of get involved and see what I was doing as I was doing a bit of basic programming. And we used to buy, it was Your Sinclair magazine, or one of these magazines which had games listings in it. And my father was into golf, so I think we spent about a fortnight worth of evenings sitting there, and he would read out the code, and I would tap it in on the computer, and every 10 minutes we'd save it in case you had a power cut or the power cable sort of broke. We did that for weeks, a few weeks, and we finally finished it, played the game, and it would always crash at the same point. I think if you got the 8th hole and played a certain shot, that was it. So we had to go back through the code then, pretty much line by line, trying to work out where the error was, because it was all the code was reproduced from the old Sinclair heat printer, which was pretty broken. You couldn't tell your B from your 8, from your 9 sometimes. So we eventually went through, found the errant code, and fixed it. So yeah, kind of, it brought me and my dad together. It was give us a project to work on together.
So I think that definitely had a bonding effect with myself and my dad, especially. We spent quite a lot of time typing in games from magazines and books, for example. I kind of have this memory of like long dark winter nights and being around the Spectrum and programming it until all hours until bedtime, really.
My dad used to play Night Law and TNR, because my dad had some early games consoles. So my dad's been playing golf and Space Invaders on a weird old British sort of games machine, and he would play Night Law and things like that. But I think that was more him trying to reach out and engage with us rather than him actually enjoying the game itself.
So I think the Spectrum it started off as a family entertainment thing. So me and my sister would sit and play together. We'd do the whole start the tape off and wait for it to load and stuff. And honestly, like half of the fun was sitting and waiting for it to load, and then it crashing and then having to start all over again. But it was just like bringing the family together. We'd sit and somebody would be playing and somebody would be watching, or we'd be playing together, that kind of thing. My sister and me particularly used to play with the Quora speech program, where you type in rude words and then it'd say the kind of Spectrum would say it at the speakers. So that was awesome. We used to play with that for hours, as you can imagine, as kids. So it just kind of meant family time to me, really. Getting to play with my sister and sort of sitting around, because you didn't really have more than one TV, well, we didn't. So it was kind of a bit of a family moment of us all coming together, and we would go and buy those magazines with the lines of code in it, and try and make it work, and it never worked. But I mean, I work in the games industry now, so I believe that there was something about those sort of first games that I played that sort of planted a seed in my head. You know, and I've played games all my life since that point. So it must have led down some kind of line for me to be here today as a game designer. So that's fantastic that something like that could have sparked a whole career, really.
I played some games with my brother, but we also I didn't ever initiate any games, I think. I only played games that he already had and that he and his friends passed amongst each other. But there were certainly some games that I preferred and other games that he preferred. My dad also used to play quite a lot of games. I don't think I played with them very much, apart from perhaps those kind of sporting ones, the decathlon ones, when we would hammer the keyboards crazily, or damage the keyboards on both sides. But I remember my dad writing short programs for me on the ZX Spectrum, little like maths programs for me to use to help my schoolwork. So I remember doing that, and I remember my brother and my dad passing Spectrum magazines backwards and forwards and typing in code for hours on end. So it was kind of something that we didn't necessarily play together, but it was a shared interest amongst me and my brother and my dad.
So my older brother's fine. Sister had no interest in it at all. But she did eventually, she understood their value, and she did buy me games for Christmas and stuff like that. She knew I had an interest in it, but she had no interest in it personally.
My sister actually discovered Jet Set Willy for me, would you believe? I hadn't really appreciated it was a sequel to Man at Miner, and she would go on for weeks upon weeks, because she used to play with her friend whose brother had a ZX Spectrum. And she would go on about this fantastic game for a little man with a top hat, and you're wandering a mansion collecting things. You've got to see this. Obviously she didn't correlate it was part of the Man at Miner universe, so it was quite good. It was we're kind of having a two-way conversation without connecting it together. So she was so passionate about this game that I actually begged and pleaded to my parents, please can you get us it? And my sister went down to the shops with me to get it, and she found it and pointed it, there it is mum, there it is, and get it. And a really good memory of that, because we went back to the house, loaded it up, and we played it together, and there was a very strong bond, and it's actually something we still speak about today, and it rekindles memories. Remember this time when this happened, side by side on the chair, nudging each other for a shot, a play of it. So yeah, absolutely fantastic memories.
So I'm Jonathan, and this is Suzanne.
Hi, Suzanne.
We're siblings, and yeah, I think I know more of the technical details.
We had a ZX Spectrum Plus 2, I know this.
Well done.
Thanks.
And we must have got it 87, 88. Not that I necessarily remember, because I was only 7 or 8,
yeah.
But it didn't come out much before then. So we're not a proper Spectrum first generations, we're sort of second generation type people.
I just remember the Plus 2 was very important. I had to explain that to people a lot.
Really?
Yeah. You got Spectrum, well, Plus 2, oh, it's a bit different.
Built-in tape deck.
Exactly.
Which is nice. Because, yeah, our cousin, and this is the bit that might shock you, our cousin had the original, which of course was small, much smaller than the Plus 2, had an external tape deck, didn't have a tape deck built in, and it had the rubber keypads. You might remember that, it had little grey, soft keys.
So did we had a harder one, okay.
Solid. But, and the funny thing about him is he used to play the Football Manager games, and we used to sometimes visit our family on Sundays, which was really fun. And sometimes pop into his bedroom and he'd just have it on running because he said, oh yeah, I can't save the game. So he'd have it on, and it had been on for the last week or something because he couldn't save the game.
I didn't know that.
And so he'd just be there burning away in the corner of his room.
One of the things that was always special with the Spectrum was when it came to Christmas time, because I always asked for lots of Spectrum games. I was always allowed to bring my Spectrum downstairs. It was the one time a year when I could, and it was just great because you would encapsulate the whole family playing through it. And I always remember with Chase HQ, actually the year that I got that, handing the joystick to my granddad and him looking at this strange device. He had no really idea, and teaching him how to use the joystick. And yeah, it was great fond memories of getting all the family together, particularly around Christmas time.
My overriding memory of a family experience when we were playing the Spectrum was it was one Sunday, and we were playing this racing game called Continental Circus. It was notoriously difficult, and the history with it goes, nobody in our family had ever got past the first track, and one Sunday afternoon, and in one moment of inspiration, I managed to get through all the courses, right to the last one. The whole family was in the background sort of cheering me on, and when I finished, we did complete the game in just that one mad Sunday afternoon. My dad looks like disappointed because it turns out that he'd missed bullseye that afternoon.
I remember my cousin had a copy of Harrier Attack. I remember going to his house in Scotland and playing it there, and I was just blown away by how good it was. And then I remember at the end of the holiday I said, look, if there's any chance I can borrow this game, and he must have been probably 10 years older than me, so I would have been maybe 10 or 11, he would have been in his 20s, and he was like, yeah, I'll just keep it, and it was like the happiest thing ever. And I've still got the tape. It was a big thing. Really, really cool. I've got a brother and a sister. They're both quite a bit younger than me. They're probably 10 years younger than me. So they never really were all that interested in the Spectrum. By the time they were old enough to be aware of what it was, things had sort of moved on. So it was me, sort of as almost an only child for a bit, and that was my little go-to place. I remember the first time I got Match Day 2, and my dad came into my room and I was playing it, and he's a big football guy, and I remember him saying, can I have a go? I was like, oh no, you can't get the two-player thing working. And I probably think about that with regret once a month for the last 30 years. So absolutely, yeah, shocker. And then he's a football manager, my dad, and I remember when we got Kevin Tom's Football Manager game, and I just couldn't really get on with it. I remember being able to press break on the keyboard and you could enter go-to line, whatever it was, and you'd won the FA Cup and it showed the screens for that. But I remember playing it with him one afternoon, and we spent a long time playing season after season after season, and eventually we actually won the FA Cup for real, and it was a real power moment.
I decided to ask my brother about his memories.
Wow. Yes, look at that. It's good, crikey.
So you haven't seen that for a while?
No. It feels like the real thing.
It's my one.
Oh, well, I haven't played on an actual Spectrum since many years, 25 years more, maybe 30 even. But what has happened is that I now am aware that they are available on the internet.
I remember the keys now.
It's Curio Pair.
Is it?
See how far you can go. Go right. Look. There you go. You see, you did it. Go. Oh.
This is better. 3D Tank was quite realistic.
Modern military knows no mercy. Can only be one winner.
Why not?
It's firing now. Fires very well.
Yeah, 90. Oh, tank. Oh.
Getting away on a chopper.
More
There's
trees.
more trees. Wow. Oh my gosh. Oh my goodness. I was thinking about it recently and realising what was so emblematic about it was having that rainbow logo, which signified this is going to be a colourful experience, hence the name Spectrum. And it's like the Wizard of Oz, isn't it? The movement from black and white to colour with the spectrum, really. A kind of so there's a technological change there that also leads to a new world of imagination.
The ZX Spectrum soon moved upstairs to my bedroom rather than living room, where, like a lot of teenage boys at the time, I had a red bulb, very sordid. Maybe I thought it was sophisticated or grown up. And one game that I particularly remember coming back to over and over again was Gargoyle Games Tir Na Nog. I was never good at this game. I mean, I never really played the game in the normal sense. I didn't play it to win it. I was terrible at it, but I never really even tried. What I did was simply explore. I simply walked around exploring, and that was the pleasure in it for me, just looking at the landscape. I felt like I was immersed in that world. I felt I was wandering around on my own, uninhibited, exploring another land. From one angle, there was a castle, and next to the castle was a tiny diagram of flying birds. And if you looked at it now, it just minuscule animation, like two-step animation, really small thing in the background. But when I think about the game now, I remember genuinely, a castle surrounded by flocks of birds, actually swarming with flocks of birds. A tiny detail in the background, but that has become part of my imagination. And I didn't feel like I was myself, an awkward teenage boy. I felt like I was that warrior, a grown man, walking around freely, independently, where no one could bother me, and actually where I could be on my own. A lot of the pleasure was solitude, escape into a world which was just my world to walk around. And even though it was a commercial game, and loads of people owned that game, and it was programmed by coders at Gargoyle Games, I think my experience of Tir Na Nog is different from anyone else's. So in a way it was my world, because I kind of co-created it by investing my imagination in it. My own memories of Tir Na Nog are as individual as a hand-drawn sketch. But my broader experience of immersion in these games, despite their simple graphics, wasn't unique. Many people felt the same way.
Well, my favourite game, I think, overall was Night Lore, because I loved that game, and just the graphics were so amazing, and the fact that you could... I enjoyed mapping, and it was a nice grid format, so you could draw the map out. I thought the puzzles in that game were fantastic, and I think it felt like a place, I think, when I was playing it, and then you'd walk through, when you go into the forest, and all the different things that happen when you change into a werewolf and stuff. And it felt, going back and playing it now, it feels so simple and straightforward and a bit niggling that some things of it are just difficult. But back then, it just seemed like this entire world with a whole sort of mythology behind it, and the way that we knew that Saberman went from this into other games. And there was a game, Mirror Mare, wasn't it, at the end? That I thought, well, I don't know what that is, and Pentagram, and it came with Saberwolf. And I think, yeah, that was I love that game, just the excitement of playing it. I think the mechanics of it were so easy to learn. And even now, I think, when I've gone back and played Spectrum games, that's usually what I go back for.
Marsport, which is one that I've still playing nowadays. I found my old copy of it that's got a map that I started to draw. It's not a complete map, but it's nice to go back and see that's how involved I was in that game. Absolutely loved it. There was definitely a feeling of choices and consequences that I was having to be in a kind of panicked or fear mode, wanting to get to safety. And that wasn't just me looking at the character and moving around the screen. I felt invested in making sure that character got to that safe space or ran or had the right equipment. So that really pushed me over and above other games where you were in control of a character. It felt as if we were on a journey together. So yeah, it felt quite bonding to have a game like that where I was feeling certain emotions, not just a will I get to the end of the level, but can I make this character survive?
One of the things I loved most in a Spectrum game was games where I could explore, and I think you'd get really fascinated by areas that felt just out of reach, and sometimes those were real. So sometimes you'd find a hidden door or a secret passage or a tip from a magazine, and it led you into a new area of the game. So Frankie Goes to Hollywood was one of those games that I can remember when they said they were going to do it. And what was really exciting about the game was, as a young boy playing a computer in my front room, you were in the game where you were entering little houses, going into the kitchen, going into the lounge. There was like sofas and fridges and mundane things. But any one of those things you could open or turn on or interact with, and it would open a mini game or another part of the game that you hadn't seen before. And it just felt like not just a really big world to explore, but behind any mundane door or object could be something really exciting and colourful and strange.
When I look back at Lords of Midnight now, I can remember the geography of how it works. And I remember, you start off sort of in the Midlands, and then you start the north was a cold bit, and I remember the route travelling down through the mountains to get to the big cast in the south, and there was you were given so little about the characters. You knew there were 2 or 3 characters called somebody the Wise, or there's groups called the Fae, and I think that tiny little gem of information made it just grow inside your head. So you would think, well, I know how the Fae interact with the normal people. I know how the Wise, I'm sort of thinking they're kind of like Gandalfs or something. And then you'd wander around and there's this one character called the Utarg of Utarg who dresses like a normal soldier. And in my mind you sort of think, well, this is clearly the socialists of Midnight. They're the ones who rule themselves, they don't need a lord to do it. And like the Lord of Blood, I always imagine as quite a stern figure. And there's nothing there. There's absolutely nothing in it to give you that information. And I always sort of longed when computers evolved and when PC games came along, I thought, if only somebody would do like a 3D version of the Lords of Midnight, that I could just roam around and go and see these things. And I'd imagine the mountains of Midnight cropping up towards me. It was a beautiful world, which, again, I think, when it did advance, so when you've got Doom Dark's Revenge and things, then it felt too big. And there were too many options. And you sort of think, I don't feel this world is... I can't contain this world in my mind.
This was a world, an actual world in a 48K Spectrum. Mike Singleton, may rest in peace, was a genius when he made this game. It was a world which is very similar to Lord of the Rings, but he couldn't make Lord of the Rings for licensing reasons, so he changed all the storylines, and it was you as Luxor the Moon Prince, and also Morkin and Rothran and Korlef the Fae. These are names that still I remember after all these decades, that you controlled simultaneously across a landscape, trying to battle the forces of Doomdark. And sometimes I won, sometimes I really, really failed. And that was one of my most extraordinary memories of seeing that landscape for the first time. One of the extraordinary things about this game, it has an incredible loading screen. And most games at that time, the loading screen bore no relation to what the game was about at all, or actually how it looked. But not the case with this, because when it loaded, it just flashed up and carried on. And my friend and I, a very good friend, I still have contact with to this day. He and I looked at the screen and wait, that's it? This is what it really looks like? Really? And then just forged on ahead, and we were just stunned and got completely drawn into this world.
So I think there are a few games I played on the Spectrum that I took with me beyond what I saw on the screen. Dundalk was probably one of the ones I have the fondest memories of. Walking around and inventing little stories in my head for the shopkeepers and wondering what they did when the lights, when it turned to the night cycle and all the shops had closed. I remember trying to work out where all of the people that you met in the streets had gone, whether the door that I couldn't open was their house. And I think that the graphics were just sufficient for me to picture the city in my mind. And combined with things like the incredible maps that were in magazines like Crash magazine, those all built up an image in my mind of what I was actually playing, even though the pixels were so small on the screen and so abstract in their representation.
So one of my favourite games is Heavy on the Magic by Gargoyle Games. I think a lot of people tend to overlook Heavy on the Magic in favour of Tir na Nog or Dundalk instead.
And I think the Spectrum colour palette worked really well with this game. The caverns themselves were monochrome, but the different colours. So you could imagine in your mind's eye the red screens being red brick, the magenta screens being a crystal caverns, the cyan screens being icy caverns, and the white screens being marble lined halls.
So yeah, it was a game that I found too hard, probably due to my age in the first place. But I did persevere with it, kept going, kept coming back to it, got a bit further each time, and eventually beat the game, all 3 exits.
So how did these simple graphics and limited colours make us feel fully immersed in imaginary worlds? Here's an example. When Steve Turner created the game Avalon in 1984, he used a combination of digital and analogue methods to build its world.
I wanted to write games.
He modelled the main character, Marok, from plasticine to see how he'd look from various angles, and then drew him on graph paper. Before programming the game, he constructed sets from cardboard, like a toy theatre. He realised he didn't have to show the entire environment. If we just saw part of it, we'd imagine the rest. From an earlier game, Ultimate Attic Attack, he knew that an environment could be suggested with simple, clean lines. The player's imagination would fill in the gaps. He borrowed the horizon line from his own game, 3D Lunatic, and adapted that into the back wall of Avalon. Avalon's graphics only suggest the caverns, but players felt immersed in a detailed, atmospheric world because they invested their imaginations in the game.
Living in a council house back in the 80s, there was no central heating. There was a coal fire down the living room. That was the only source of heat in the house. So I would like to fire this game up at night. My mum and dad were all sleeping, and I'd wrap up many layers of clothing, even put socks in my hands, to stay warm. Muffle the Spectrum while it was loading so I didn't get caught. And I sat there, and how immersive that was in the dark, in the cold, because it sucked you into the game. In the wee hours of the morning, it felt that I was in the dungeon with the wizard I was controlling, and that's what I love so much about it. I'm convinced I heard the dripping, the damp smells, the mustiness of it, and I felt the penetrating cold that would invade anybody's bones that dared to explore these tombs. Just the atmosphere this game created. It was very minimalistic, wireframe graphics. You controlled a small white sprite moving about as a wizard through all the rooms in the dungeon. Just a few bricks on the wall to represent a catacomb that you were in, and it really fired up the imagination.
The same trick was used for many other games, Night Law for instance, and Dundalk. We see a few bricks, and our imagination does the rest, filling in the space with details, even with temperature and sound. We brought each game to life and made it our own, creating whole worlds behind a door or just off screen. The ZX Spectrum isn't just a thing of the past. There's still a thriving industry of homemade or homebrew games, including some incredible graphics demos, particularly from Eastern Europe. While new computers like the ZX Spectrum Next, with its increased technical specs, offer endless possibilities for programmers. Check out Melchior's Mansion, an affectionate update of Attic Attack, which still allows players to fill in the blanks between its bricks. But is ZX Spectrum fandom based around nostalgic 40-somethings? Or will there be a new generation, rediscovering the joys of those simple graphics and the worlds they created?
I suspect kids today might find ZX Spectrum games a little bit laughable. But again, I don't begrudge that. That is the nature of kids. Things move on. They've got their own things. Maybe they wouldn't. Maybe they'd love it. I don't know. I don't have kids, so I'm not in any position to try it out. What I can say is that when I play ZX Spectrum games now, when I run a Spectrum emulator on my laptop and I play Jet Set Willy or Attic Attack or any of those games, I am absolutely 12 years old again. It gives me a frisson of nostalgia that is almost unparalleled in my life. For me, the magic is absolutely still there.
You can still feel that magic, although you could obviously buy arcade machines to get Operation Wolf played in your house. The feeling of nostalgia that connects you to that past of some of the better games that weren't about the graphics and they weren't about the sound. It was just a feeling that connected you to the past. So right now, yes, I still get that out. I've invested quite a bit of money in restoring mine so that I can have that experience and also share that experience with my daughters. And they're loving that. So one of them recently enjoyed programming in BASIC, something that she's never going to learn at school. She probably will never have a use for, but she loved coding. She loved that opportunity to learn something, and it made sense.
So to me, it's really important that this sort of history gets passed on. So I'll be getting my Spectrum out, the NES and everything out for my daughter and showing her the history of how games came about, because I don't think you can fully appreciate games like today without having known where they've come from. Like, she might see a game like that and go, oh, that's rubbish. But to sort of me and you, that's how it started, and that was all you could get in those days. That was the only way you could interact with something on a TV. So I think it's really important to show her that how we built up from simple games right up to what we have today. I want that as part of her education.
I think, in all honesty, it was absolutely part of our generation. I've got 3 kids from 16 down to 9. They really would just look at it as a quirk of history, and no matter how many times I would try to drum it into them that this was, a fantastic thing, I just don't think they live in an environment now where that would make any sense to them whatsoever. But that's great. Some things are best left in the past, evoking nostalgia in our minds. Nostalgia is a powerful thing. And I wouldn't want it to just be as pervasive and still popping up all the time. My memories are my memories, and the Spectrum was a great part of it. I fire up for my son quite often and show him some games, and he does enjoy them to a certain degree, but he wanders off. And I think what it is now is because games don't leave anything for the imagination whatsoever. Like, it's the old adage of show don't tell. It's the other way about now for kids. It's tell, don't show. So the whole thing is there for them. So if you're playing the modern Gears of War, for example, the industrial environment you're fighting in, it's not just a bit of rubble. It's the whole factory that you're in. You're in a foundry because it looks like a foundry. So the kids that are not used to, back to what we're saying, filling in the blanks.
I'm a very awkward person to ask that to, because I make games and I want to capture that with kids. So for me, I want to believe that we can give children today the same experience of projecting their imagination into what they play, because I think that is a very important aspect of art in general. I believe that the Spectrum was forced impressionism. You couldn't represent reality, and when you do that in a game like on the PS4 or PS5 or whatever modern PCs are, then you're filling in all the imagination. But a clever game leaves the gaps for the player to fill in, and I think that is something that we should endeavour to capture, so that future generations are inspired by what they play rather than just consuming what they play.
I think gaming's come a bit full circle, like with the mobile gaming. A lot of it's gone back to like the simplistic little 2D games, and you can download Jetpack refueled off of Xbox Live now, and kids will compare it to the old one, okay, yeah, it looks a bit garish and a bit old, but the gameplay is, as far as I'm concerned, still totally there, and you will see them play it. They won't just give it like a little 5-minute go. They will be there a little while until their lives run out, and then they might move on to something else.
I think if you came to it now, it would be with a very different lens. I think, people, for instance, analogy, last year I was in Liverpool, and I went out to a club night called Mirror Moves, and it was mainly like early 80s pop, like Depeche Mode, that sort of thing. And there were quite a lot of students there, and they were really into it, and they were really enjoying it. But I think they're enjoying it because they can see the lineage, they can see that music has influenced the music they like. So similarly, I think if you were like a gamer now, you would look at those games and think, wow, these are the games that are the foundation of what I do. I think for people of my age, my generation, it has a whole load of other associations. It is my living room, it is connecting the Spectrum up to the television, it is the drawer in my desk that had all my Spectrum games in it, it is my pile of Crash magazines, it is talking excitedly to friends about when's Willie Meets the Taxman going to come out. All those kind of legends and stories, and the fact that it was your kind of day-to-day, it was a really huge part of my life when I was that age. Like the Spectrum and Doctor Who were like the two most important things to me when I was 13 years old, and I don't think it could ever be like that for people now. It just doesn't occupy the same space.
I spoke to a group of students from Woking College. That's the size of a small keyboard, isn't it, Maxim? Yeah. They hadn't even seen a ZX Spectrum before, let alone held one in their hands. And they were amazed by the 48K memory.
Kilobytes?
That's its memory.
Really?
Yeah. But what would they think of the ZX Spectrum's games?
A lot of the artwork in there, the pixel artwork, seemed to be so much more detailed than I was expecting, and some of the game formats were so much more advanced. That's kind of stuff that some of which maybe the art wouldn't be as up to date, but some of the stuff looked like something I would play today, kind of on your phone or something kind of smaller like that. There was one that really stood out to me of it was red. It kind of gave me reminders of when you see footage of the Virtual Boy. It was a wizard in red. And it kind of had more of a 3D plane. It was still kind of a scroller, but you could see how it kind of went back on screen and it could move. So I was expecting more of a 2D left to right scroller, but it was much more advanced than I was expecting.
I was expecting something much worse, something like the E.T. game on Atari, something like just abysmal, slow, just difficult to look at. But when I saw it, it was much cleaner than I expected. It was quite nice to look at, the mixture of colours. It was, obviously it's not like the graphics we have today, but no, it was visually pleasing, that's for sure.
I think that you can kind of see how a lot of games are based off those games. Like a lot of the space games, there were a lot of space games in there, and I realised that you could tell how like Star Fox was based off games like that, which is pretty amazing. And you can see where Mario sort of comes from as well, because it's just also similar the way they jump and stuff like that.
It was pretty surprising, I think. It's very, very simple. There's, obviously the one color backdrop, but it's the grandfather of all things that have come from it. So.
It made me realise just how far games have come, since back then. When I think about old games, I think of Super Mario 64, but obviously it goes so much further back from that to the point where there wasn't any 3D. It was either basically a side scroller or just shooting things without any really feeling of level or anything. You're just going up and down the screen. It's really incredible, because I can't imagine being in that age where those are the games that you're playing. Especially now, I think of when I grew up, I played games like the old Halo games, but when you think of generations now growing up on the Xbox One and the PS4, they'll look back at those and think that's like a browser game that you play on your keyboard or something. Like, it's really incredible just how far everything's come. But I can appreciate old games like that.
Yeah. There are a lot of games that I wouldn't say I make a lot of friends like online, but the friends I already have, we would play online, so it would help our friendships, like fighting games, stuff like that, real competitive stuff, but it's all jokes. So,
favourite game undeniably has to be Skyrim. Something that I've bought it on multiple consoles multiple times. It has filled up hundreds of hours of my life. It has, I'd say, solidified some of the best friendships in my life.
Me and my mate Stephen, he's my best friend, and when we were younger, we used to go around each other's house and play Battlefield 3. We used to bring our consoles round, bring a TV round, and then we just sit in the same room and just bang out games. Basically, just play games constantly.
It's been very influential in my friendships. You know, going into I moved to England from Scotland in 2010, and you know it was very tough for me to try and fit in, and you know with my accent, it's very funny. So video games was a good place to start with people, and it's how I met some friends who I'm keeping to this day.
With the online capabilities of games now, I've met so many friends through playing online games that I chat to on the internet who live all around the world. Like, it shows just how much of an influence video games have on people's lives. Like, it's really incredible.
Yeah, hopefully I'll be able to. I know around then when I'll be 50 odd, nostalgia will be a big part of my life when I'm that old. Looking back, remembering when I was young. So, yeah, being able to remember the games that we had today, even though they'll be, I don't know, much better in the future, it'll be something nice to look back on.
There's been some amazing experiences, and it brings you into this like new imaginary world where you never thought was possible. You never thought this place was possible, and people have created it for you. I think it's just a great experience, really.
I was 12 years old when I first saw the Breakout game, Through the Wall. My son was almost 1 year old when I first showed him the game. His toys are red, green, yellow, blue, bright primary colours, just like Spectrum graphics, even cyan. And he likes knocking things down. Would he be entranced by the magic of the on-screen moving objects that captivated me when I was young?
Maybe not. Maybe not yet. Maybe his experience of computers will be entirely different. But maybe in 30 years' time, he'll look back on the games that changed him, on the games that shaped his childhood and adolescence, on the games that made him who he is as an adult. I hope so.